combining responses from over 300 Brawl Stars players around the world to come up with the best brawlers for every single mode and the best brawlers overall in Brawl Stars. This is the ultimate tier list. At least until the next balance changes come out. So recently on the subreddit r/BrawlStarsCompetitive, the two users SkyCole123 and BMoneyTheWise put out a survey asking for players to rank every single brawler on a scale of 0 to 3 in every single game mode. And this survey received hundreds of responses, and they were kind enough to let me use the data for this video. And if you want to see the original Reddit post as well as the post with the resulting data and all of their analysis, it will be linked in the description, as well as those two users. All of the bar graphs I'm using in this video, as well as the overall tier list, were created by them, so a huge shout out to them for putting this all together, gathering all the data, and making all these awesome graphs. I want to go over each of the results for these modes, as well as a bit of my own statistical analysis for this data, so that way we can really figure out what the actual best brawlers in this meta are. I think this tier list is probably the most accurate tier list you're going to find, because not only does it combine the opinions of so many people, but the average player on Brawl Stars Competitive is usually anywhere from like 20,000 trophies and up, some at 30,000, some at 40,000, maybe some below 20,000 as well, but it's not exclusively professional players, and there's not going to be too many people who are just starting out with the game. So these people's opinions are going to be a lot more relevant to the games that you're going to be playing in Brawl Stars, rather than if it was just pros exclusively making a tier list, because the pros have a completely different understanding of the game at that really top tier level that a lot of times is different from the way that the game is played at slightly lower levels. So hopefully this tier list is going to be the most accurate for your needs, so that way you can get the best brawlers for every single mode, and then at the very end we're going to look at the overall tier list. So hopping into the results for the first mode, which is Gem Grab. This is the bar graph that displays the average of all the different results for every single brawler. Remember, it was on a scale of 0 to 3, so 3 being the absolute best and 0 being the absolute worst possibility. Now, there were a few outliers in this data. Obviously, we're on Reddit, so people are going to troll every once in a while, and some people just put in like all 3s or all 0s for their answers. And so to measure which entries were outliers, after looking at the averages for each of these brawlers, I measured the amount of really large variations that each person had for each individual brawler. So what I did was I rounded the number up and I rounded the number down, and if a person put in either of those values, then that was normal, and if a person put in a different value that was really high or really low, I would count that as a variation. And now, of course, people are going to have tons of these even if they're just answering it normally, but for people who had this for basically every single brawler, I took those values out because there's a pretty obvious difference between those who were just doing it to troll and those who were actually just putting in their own opinion. But the thing is, when I removed these outliers from the data, it actually didn't make any noticeable changes on the graph. The only brawlers it changed were Shelly and El Primo, the two really low brawlers, and it just made them have a much lower overall average viability. And that makes sense because a lot of people trolling just put in 3s for those brawlers. So when you take those out, it's certainly going to have the largest influence on those brawlers. But because it didn't really affect any of the other brawlers, I didn't do this for the rest of the data. So just keep in mind that outliers in or outliers not in, the data is going to be basically the exact same. And so now I've put the top brawlers from this graph into a tier list. And in the S tier, I've put everyone who had an average of 2.5 to 3. And in the A tier, I put everyone who had an average of 2 to 2.5. So these are ordered starting from the best brawlers at the very top, and the tier cutoffs is simply a arbitrary cutoff I chose based on their numbers. But every brawler that has an average rating of 2 to 3 is probably going to be really good in any of these modes that I'm going to touch on. So there are many top tier brawlers for Gem Grab. In the S tier, you have Byron, Mr. P, Sprout, Amber, 8-Bit, Colonel Ruffs, and Sandy. And then not as many brawlers in the A tier. We have Jessie, Pam, Max, and Tara, but these are all going to be very good options, and there's enough variety in these top brawlers that you can combine them to form a really well-balanced team at sort of any level. Now next up is Brawl Ball, and you can see the graph is actually a bit more spread out. The highs and the lows are overall less, and all the brawlers are slightly closer together to being even. And if we look at the top 2 tiers for this mode, just the brawlers who average anywhere from 2 to 3, we can see that there are a lot more brawlers who placed here. So there are many options that are really good in Brawl Ball. At the top, we've got Amber, BB, Sandy, Byron, Colonel Ruffs, and Max, and then in the A tier, we have Mr. P, Jessie, Sprout, Jackie, Tara, Rosa, and Nita. I think these are all really strong options, and the ones at the very top are doing really well in Brawl Ball right now. Now moving on, we've got Bouncy, and unlike Brawl Ball, this is a very small meta. So the brawlers at the top are very much at the top, and the brawlers who aren't at the top, you can see the graph slides down very quickly. So there are definitely fewer options to choose from in terms of picking the best brawlers for this mode. But up at the top in the S tier, we have Byron, Mr. P, Sprout, and Tick. Tick has become pretty solid now with his new gadget that lets him be a lot more versatile and a lot more consistent consistent when you're playing in Bounty, so it's nice to see him up there with the other throwers Sprout as well. And then the A tier we have Piper, Nani, and Colonel Ruffs. So all 7 of these brawlers are going to be super strong in Bounty, and honestly anything other than these 7 brawlers is really not going to be that good, save for a specific few like Mortis or Jackie, who can really hard counter specific comps. But if we're just going for general strength in this mode, these are going to be the brawlers that are going to get it done. Now the next mode is Heist, and we also have a pretty focused meta in this mode as well. There are a lot of brawlers who are just really bad at Heist, and that's probably due to the fact that there are some brawlers who just don't have a lot of DPS by the nature of their design, so there's really no way to make them good in Heist. Whereas with Brawl Ball, which had a really diverse meta, even if it's a brawler that doesn't deal much damage, you can always sort of make do in Brawl Ball and still find a way to get value out of them, because there's just so many other things you're doing in Brawl Ball other than just straight up dealing damage. But if we take a look at Heist here, the top 4 brawlers are pretty solidly in the lead actually. The S tier is Amber, 8-Bit, Jessie, and Colt, all extremely high DPS brawlers and really solid in the meta. And then in the A tier, some other really good Heist brawlers. We have Nita, Spike, BB, and Max. And we've got 2 more modes to go. Next up we have Siege. This meta is definitely a lot more spread out, and I think a lot of the brawlers are really contested in terms of who's good in Siege and who's not. I think a lot of it can definitely depend on the map as well, but according to the tier list, this is what the best brawlers are. So in the S tier, we have Amber, Sprout, and BB, and note that the S tier is actually not too far above the A tier here, so all of these top brawlers are fairly similar in terms of strength in this mode. So don't just think you have to choose from the S tier because they're so much better than the A tier. They're all actually pretty close. And then we've also got Mr. P, Jessie, Sandy, Byron, Lou, Colonel Ruffs, Pam, Max, Tick, Barley, and finally 8-Bit. All of these are great options for Siege. It does depend on the map a bit, depending on if you want to run maybe more throwers or a bit more long range in your comp, but generally speaking, these are going to be the best brawlers in Siege. And then our last 3v3 mode is Hot Zone. Again, a pretty spread out meta. Not surprising that Amber is yet again at the top here, along with Sandy, a very good area control brawler, so of course he's going to be great in Hot Zone. And then we also have Jessie, and those are the 3 brawlers that are going to make it into the S tier above a 2.5 average over all of these 300 responses. And then in the A tier, we have Mr. P, Colonel Ruffs, Sprout, Byron, Tick, Ems, BB, Pam, and 8-Bit. So there are a lot of really strong comps that you can make out of these brawlers. And that brings us to the end where we're going to look at the overall tier list. So to make this overall tier list, the 2 Reddit users who gathered all the data just averaged all the results from all the modes together and then ranked the resulting numbers. And with that, here is going to be the final graph for the overall brawler viability. You can notice that the highs are a lot less high and the lows are a lot less low than you would see on a normal graph, and not just because in one particular mode any brawler might be high, but in order for the overall viability for that to be high as well, they would have to be that high in every other mode as well. Otherwise, when it gets average, it's going to decrease slightly, and same with the low numbers. If someone has a particular mode where they're really bad, they would have to be that bad in every single mode in order for their average viability to be that low as well. So that's why everything is a bit closer to the mean in this graph. And then if we put everything into one final tier list, here it is. The tiers here are not based on the numbers so much as it is just when there is a pretty big gap in the average numbers. So the difference between S tier and A tier here is a bit more pronounced, and the gap between A tier and B tier and C tier, and so on. And poor Shelly in her own tier at the bottom there, even with all the trolls vouching for her, still made it significantly below everywhere else. And this tier list right here pretty much encapsulates the meta as we have it. Maybe you might have the opinion that a few brawlers should be changed, maybe up 1 or down 1 tier, but overall this is very accurate, and the fact that this is over 300 people's responses shows you that if you disagree with this, then you're probably going to be in the minority. And I'm not saying you're incorrect, there certainly could be a underlooked brawler in the meta, but generally speaking, this is almost as close to correct as we can get it. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you learned a lot from this ultimate tier list. Once again, shout out to SkyCole123 and BMoneyTheWise for putting together all of this data and all of these graphs. It's really helpful stuff. Don't forget to check out this playlist if you want to see more videos where I apply math to create cool Brawl Stars guides. But that's all for today, guys, so see you later.